everybody, I'm Pia from Stitches and Scraps. Today I want to talk to you about split stitches, which are sometimes also called center stitches. Specifically, we're going to be working into the round. The reason that we're working in the round is because these stitches are much easier to work when you're working from the front of the stitch. When you work in the round, if you don't turn your work, you're always working into the front of the stitch. So that's going to make this much easier for us. If you look here, I've got just some regular stitches worked into the round, and you can see that the beginning of the round, and I haven't joined this last round for a reason, which I'll show you later, but you can see that the beginning of the round actually shifts to the right by a half a stitch with every round. The reason that happens is because these stitches are not perfectly centered on top of the stitch below them. If you look at this stitch, it's actually between these two stitches. So that happens because of where we're putting our hook, because normally for a regular crochet we put our hook here. For a split or center crochet, we're going to actually be putting our hook right in the center of the post of the stitch. For a single crochet, the post of the stitch is this little V, but whatever stitch we work into, we're going to be going into the post. So that's going to line our stitches up directly right on top of each other. The differences in the different split stitches are not so much about the stitch that you're working, it's about the stitch that you're working into, because you want to see where the top of that post is. So we're going to look at working into a couple of different types of stitches, and we're going to start with working into single crochet. Now here I have my few rounds of single crochet that I didn't quite finish the last round, and the reason for that is I'm going to start working center stitches now, so I want to set myself up to be in the center of the stitch. So instead of joining the round here with a slip stitch like I normally would, I'm going to go right into the center of the stitch. If you remember, this is the top of the stitch, this V here. This is the loop that starts on your hook. This is this loop right here. That's what makes the top of the stitch. This bottom part of the stitch, the post, for a single crochet, that is the loop that you pull up. So if I was making a single crochet, that would be that loop right there. That's what we're calling the center of our stitch. That's our post, this little V shape here. So when I join this, instead of joining with a slip stitch here, I'm going to join right into the center of that post. And now you can see I'm lined up perfectly on top of that stitch. So I'm ready to start my centered stitches. I'm going to go ahead and do double crochet for this round, and the stitches, when you work in the center like this, they're a little bit lower down than they normally are, so they end up being a little bit shorter than normal. So I'm actually going to only chain 2 to start my double crochet instead of the normal 3, and I'm going to count that as my first split double crochet. So let's work our next split double crochet into this single crochet. So I start like a normal double crochet. Everything about the double crochet itself is normal. The only thing that changes is where I put my hook. So normally I would be putting my hook here, which is under this V on the top, but for a split stitch, I'm going to be putting my hook here, which is right in the center of this post. So I'm putting my hook here, and it's a little bit tight, and you might find that it's a little bit tight when you first start working these. And then I'm going to finish my double crochet like I normally would. And now you can see I've got a double crochet that's lined up perfectly on top of this single crochet here. And that's what I'm going for. I'm going for stitches that stack up on top of each other in a straight line. So let's do a couple more of those. I'm going to do a double crochet into the center of this stitch here. Let's try another one. Yarn over like a normal double crochet, insert my hook into the center of the stitch. Pull up a loop, and you can see that the loop is right in the middle of that V, and then finish my stitch like I normally would. So there you have a centered double crochet or a split double crochet worked into single crochets. I'm going to finish this round, and then I'm going to do a round of treble crochets, and I'm going to come back to you. Okay, I'm back. I've finished one round of double crochet, and I'm nearly finished with this round of treble crochet too. And I wanted to show you where I'm working into the double crochets. any stitch, whether it's a single crochet, double crochet, treble crochet, however many crochets it is, however tall the stitch is, it's always going to look the same on the top. With a single crochet, you remember we saw this V on the top, and then there was the post only had the one little V in it, right? With a double crochet, we have all this extra post down here, but if we ignore that, we still have what looks like a single crochet, which is this V on the top and the post with one V right at the top there. So when we work into taller stitches, we're basically going to ignore the bottom of the stitch entirely. We're only going to work into this V that's at the top, or sorry, that's at the top of the post, which is the center V, which is just like working into the single crochet, right into there. It's a little harder to see with these stitches because it's a little bit twisted, but it's basically the same thing. So let's work a treble crochet into this double crochet. So I yarn over twice for my treble crochet, and now instead of going here, which is where I normally go, I'm going to find this V that's under here, and I'm going to go into the center of that V. So now when I pull up this loop, you're going to be able to see how it's lined up. It's lined up directly on top of the post of this double crochet. So let's finish this stitch. Now I'm going to join into the top of the starting chain 3, which was the first stitch of my round, and let's do another round of double crochets. So I'm going to chain 2, because remember I'm going to start with a chain 2 for a double crochet, and that's going to count as my stitch. Let's look at these treble crochets, and you can see that the tops of these stitches look exactly like the tops of the double crochets. We just ignore everything below that, and you've got what looks a lot like a single crochet, which is this top V here, the V on the post here, and this is where you normally put your hook, and this is where you're going to put your hook for a center stitch, right here in the middle of that V. So let's do some double crochets. I skipped a stitch here. This is the first one. Let's do some double crochets into these trebles. So there is a double crochet, and now here's the V on this treble, and I'm going to put a double crochet right into there. Now you'll remember that I said that you don't have to worry so much about what stitch you're making. It's more about what you're working into. You can make literally any stitch into this. Do you want to do an increase? Let's do an increase. Let's put 2 double crochets into the same stitch. Okay, there you go. And the 2 double crochets are centered on top of this post. Let's do a decrease. To do a decrease in a normal double crochet decrease, we're doing a double crochet 2 together. In a normal double crochet decrease, you start both double crochet stitches, you kind of work them both halfway, and then you finish them off together. We're going to do exactly the same thing. We're just going to do it worked into the posts instead, into that the top of the post, the center of the stitch. Instead of working into this, we're going to work into this. So let's do that. I've started with a yarn over, insert into the first stitch, pull up a loop, and draw through 2 loops. That's just like I would start a normal double crochet decrease. I've got 2 loops left on my hook, yarn over, go into the next stitch, do the same thing. Now I've got 3 loops on my hook, I've got 2 partial stitches done, and I'm going to finish this decrease by finishing both stitches at the same time. And now I have a decrease, and you can see the posts of the decrease are centered on top of the posts from the stitch below. You can do fancier stitches too. Let's do a cluster stitch. A cluster stitch is a little bit like a decrease at the top. It's just all worked into one stitch, right? So let's do a cluster stitch. I'm going to do a 5 double crochet cluster, all worked into this stitch right here. So I just keep putting my, oops, I did too much of my double crochet there. Let's try that again. I'm going to do a 5 double crochet cluster worked into this stitch. So I start my first double crochet and I go into the top of this stitch here. And I've got a partial double crochet on my hook now. Do another one. Okay, I've got 1 more loop on my hook. Let's keep going. That was 2. This is 3. And you can see there's 3 posts lined up there. This is 4. And 1 more makes 5. Okay, so now I've got a 5 double crochet cluster, and the 6th loop here is the loop that was already on my hook from before. So we're going to close that cluster off, and I always like to work a chain on the top of my clusters. Some people do, some people don't, but I feel it gives it a nice closed feeling at the top. I'm going to finish this round with some normal double crochets, and we're going to come back and see how to work into these stitches that we made just now. Okay, I finished that round and I've started another round. I started with half double crochets and I've come up to the point where we made that decrease. You can see that we started with the 2 stitches here, and then we have 1 post here and 1 post here, both of them finished off together at the top, and that was our decrease that we made. When you look at this, because we have the 2 posts, you have a center of each of those posts. Here is our normal top V where we normally work, but underneath that, on the other stitches, we had just 1 V that was the center of the post, and that's where we worked into. But in this case, we have 2 posts, so we have 2 V's. There's the other one hidden back there. So when we work into this stitch, we want to work into both of those V's at the same time. In other words, we're working into the center of both posts together. So I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to insert my hook into this one and into that one. Okay? And now, oop, I caught something there. Now when I pull up my loop, you can see it's centered on top of both of those posts. And when I finish my stitch, there you go. Now I have a half double crochet that's centered on top of that decrease. When you work into a cluster, it's very much the same thing. Remember, I had mentioned that a cluster is like working 5 double crochet decrease all into the same stitch. And what that leaves us with, if you look, here is our V at the top of the stitch. This was that slip stitch we made. We're going to ignore that, okay? But here was our V at the top of the stitch, and then under that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 posts. And there is that top loop on all 5 of those posts. You can see they're very much twisted, but we're going to try working into the top loop of all 5 of those posts. So I've yarned over to start my half double crochet. I go under 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then through to the back because you want to go to the back, and pull up my loop and finish my stitch. So now I have a stitch that's centered over that, that cluster. If I'm honest, I probably wouldn't work into a cluster that way. You can do a center stitch into a cluster, but with a cluster, especially if you finish it with that slip stitch, you can already work into the top of it and be fairly centered. So the reason for doing a centered stitch into a cluster would be more just if you like the look of it, because it kind of turns these loops around a little bit. But the point is you can do it. I just don't think I would very often. But there is how you work into a cluster. So pretty much you can work any stitch you want as a centered stitch, because what matters is where you're putting your hook, not what stitch you're making. You can also work into almost any stitch as a center stitch. What you have to do is just look for the top loop or the top V of every post that's involved in that stitch. I'm going to finish this round of half double crochets, and then we'll come back to how to work into those. All right, I finished my round of half double crochets. Now let's look at how to work into those. Half double crochets are pretty unique because they're like single crochets, but they have this weird little line that's on top of the post. That line is sort of a loop. That's that extra yarn over, and you can see that it comes from the back here and wraps around to the front. There's 2 ways you could conceivably work into a half double crochet. If we ignore that yarn over and we work just into the center of that post, that gives us a look that's very much like working into a single crochet. Let me do a couple more so you can see. The line that goes across it kind of gets hidden, and we get what looks more or less like a single crochet. That's a perfectly valid way of working into a half double. It's just, why would you bother doing a half double then? Why not just do a single? So here's a different way to work into a half double. Instead of ignoring this line, let's go under the line and go right into the center of that post underneath that line. Now when we finish the stitch, that yarn over line is still sitting on top. So we get a look that looks a little bit more like a half double crochet. That is the way I like to do it, because then you get that half double crochet look, but you still get a centered stitch, as opposed to this, which gives you a look much more like a single crochet. So you can see the difference. This one has that line on top. This one really doesn't. The line's there, but it's kind of pushed off to the side. So let's review the way I like it. Insert your hook underneath this loop here and into the center of the stitch. And finish your stitch like normal. I'm working double crochets here. I'm going to finish a few more just so you can see what they look like when they're done. Oop, I got all caught up in that one. Let's try it again. And sometimes it takes a little patience to get into the center of the stitches. It's not natural to work into that, so it can sometimes be a little tricky. But there we go. You've got, I'm going to pull this out so I can lay it a little flat for you. You have double crochets worked into half double crochets. Now, as you can see, all of these stitches that we've made, let's get away from all that mess, all of these stitches that we've made are now lining up directly in line right on top of each other. And when we look at the beginning of our rows, our rounds, here's the beginning. Let me get it. There we go. When you were doing regular stitches, you could see that the round shifted a little bit every stitch. Now when we started the centered stitches, the beginning of our round is nice and even, straight up and down, without that shift. So that is one of the benefits. It's a little hard to see, I think, but here are the beginning of the round for my single crochets that were just normal single crochets. There's 3 rounds there. And then here is the beginning of the round, or rather the end of the round, for my split stitches. So that's how you make split stitches. And again, it's more important what you're working into rather than what you're working, but you can make split stitches in almost any stitch, and you can work any stitch into them. And if you like this stitch, I will have a pattern available soon for you to try.